Okay, great. We're going to get started. So I'd just like to welcome everyone here today for the launch of the 33rd edition of the Dublin Economic Monitor. And just to kick off, I'd like to welcome the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Councillor Caroline Conway, to say a few words. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and councillors, and especially my councillor colleague, Councillor Alison Gilliland. You're very welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this year's Dublin Economic Monitor Event. The Monitor has been established quarterly since 2015, and this morning marks the launch of its 33rd edition. It is a collaboration between the 4 Dublin local authorities and gives up-to-date data analysis on what is happening in Dublin's economy. The Monitor also encourages collaboration and dialogue. It brings together stakeholders from government, academia and the business community, which helps us to tackle challenges together. There are great views here from these offices in Dublin's Docklands. It is an area that has seen a serious transformation in the last few years. It has changed from a neglected area to a major centre of trade. Of course, it has really only gone full circle, as it was the home to a major shipping port and has history as the centre of trade. Today, the ships and the dockers have been replaced by modern glass offices and landmarks like the Convention Centre and the Samuel Beckett Bridge. Dublin's Docklands has attracted multinational tech companies, financial institutions and start-ups. It is the home to the Irish headquarters of many global companies, and it is these global companies and their influence on Dublin's economy that the article in the June Monitor focuses on. The Docklands is also a meeting pot of cultures and communities. The presence of international companies, diplomatic missions and educational institutions has attracted a diverse population, which together with the domestic population has fostered a multicultural environment. Since the beginning, the Monitor has constantly evolved, and the partnership with Grant Thornton has seen a broadening in the data that is tracked. It now looks at weekly traffic patterns, restaurant bookings and job openings in Dublin, as well as the more traditional data. With Packed House, the accompanying website, dublineconomy.ie, has been upgraded with data as well as articles and videos highlighting some of the key economic trends, and I would encourage you all to visit the website and sign up to the Monitor. This quarter, we have a brand new indicator from FDI Markets, which tracks foreign direct investment into Dublin on a quarterly basis, looking at both capital investment and jobs. Timely information and well-informed opinion is essential to understanding the challenges and opportunities that face Dublin. A strong post-pandemic recovery in employment and hospitality have seen the Dublin economy perform better than expected, but capacity problems, rising interest rates, rising prices and competitive issues are all threats. This morning, Andrew Webb, Chief Economist with Grant Thornton, will discuss some of the current trends that the Monitor is highlighting. And there will be a panel discussion about the importance of foreign direct investment to the Dublin economy and the issues surrounding it. And with that, I would like to hand over to Jamie, and thank you very much.
That's great. I'd like to thank the Lord Mayor for the introduction, and I'd also like to call for Andrew Webb, Chief Economist, to come up and say a few words. But just as you're coming up, Andrew, I think it's such a beautiful venue, and you just have to look out the window to see, what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about foreign direct investment today. And I don't know if anyone was in Salesforce the last couple of weeks, but just such a big, I suppose, a big investment, just kind of as a sign of how attractive Dublin is to a lot of these new companies. I think 3,500 jobs. But I'll hand over to Andrew to give a perspective. And Andrew always gives a great perspective. You're really interesting work up in Northern Ireland, and you're quite a commentator up there in terms of the media, BBC and stuff. So we're looking forward to your perspective in terms of what's happening in Dublin today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie. Lord Mayor, delighted to be here. It's hard to think it was a year ago that we launched this in person again. So much has changed, and really this morning I want to talk a little bit about I suppose just the global context, because I think it's so important, and I think certainly with a discussion on FDI and inward investment to come and competitiveness, I think the global context is ever more important. But we're here about the Dublin economy, so I want to touch on that. I think last year as well, I said I didn't want to dwell too much on the content of the document, and would urge you to go to the website. Partly because we get measured on how many people view that website, and it helps. So, which is another reason why I'm not going to give you all the chapter and verse today on what's in it. I would suggest you read it. So, as I say, we just want to talk a bit about global. We'll touch on Ireland's economy and where we think it's going, and the key things that are playing in there, and then, as I say, close out on a little bit of a snapshot from the Dublin Economic Monitor. So this chart I like to use just to show global uncertainty. So it's the Global Uncertainty Index. There's a tracking that happens of lots of different articles, lots of different media, that really just shows how uncertain, and I think they actually search for the word uncertainty and across lots of global media. And we can see, we see probably a calming of nerves. I think we've come through an exceptionally challenging period in terms of global socio-economic political context, but we are starting to see a little bit of a calming. Probably, and I've looked at the trend over time, we're probably trending a little bit higher in terms of uncertainty around, and that's no surprise to all of us that have lived it. But we do think we're through probably the most uncertain period that we've been through, and we're into a little bit more certainty, and we can start to look forward in terms of economic planning and strategizing with a little bit more of a calm environment. As I say that, I think now I'm out on a limb there because of what we've been through. You know, it could change in a sixpence. Just then, in terms of some of the key items on our watch list from a global context, I mean, there's many different issues that are influencing the economy, but these are the key items for us at the moment. Obviously, inflation and interest rates, very important now and kicked in as the economy reopened. There was a pent-up demand release. There were supply chain issues which kick-started inflation. Our view at the time was that was transitory, but obviously with the Ukraine war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of that inflation started to become a lot more sticky and moved through energy costs. We're starting to see that ebb away, and I'll show a little bit of why we think that's ebbing away, but the concern would be that it becomes a little bit stickier, certainly around food pricing, so that's a challenge for consumers. Other issues that we're tracking at the minute, sort of touched on energy and commodity prices there, very linked to the inflation story and the interest rate story that the central banks are on a path of trying to address inflation with. I think opportunity-wise, a big disruptor at the minute in the economy is AI and ESG, and environment, sustainability and governance. Lots of regulation coming through there, lots of reporting requirements. That's shifting just how we do business and how people operate, so that's disrupting the economy. There'll be change there, and certainly with AI, there's lots happening in that space. The labour market's very tight currently as well, so that's feeding through into capacity constraints and how that all plays through in terms of where the economy goes in terms of growth. And then trade and travel flows. So I think Dublin Airport's figures very positive and very buoyant even over the last weekend with the bank holiday. The media that I saw there seems to be very buoyant for the airport. Trade, I suppose the whole Brexit issue and where we're going there, I think again starting to settle a bit, so we'll see just how that pans out in the numbers. And then finally, financial sector resilience. So we have seen some banks teetering on the brink. I think there's probably more resilience in the local banking sector, which is a good thing. I suppose lessons have been learned, so that looks okay. But globally, there's maybe just a little bit of uncertainty in the financial sector still, so something to be worked through there, and we'll see how that goes over the next 6 to 12 months or so. So trying to then tie all that through to where the global economy is. So global economic growth starting to I suppose there is growth. I suppose we'll put that out there first. The growth is expected, 2.6% globally this year, and growth again next year. It is trending lower than historically, and quite a variation then between the major economies. What's feeding that, and I suppose what's likely to feature over the next period of looking into where the economy goes. Inflation, which we all know had taken hold, we have seen a turn in that. We think it's starting to loosen its grip somewhat. We hope that that will be quite a rapid turnaround back towards target levels of around 2%. But as I said at the start, potentially sticky, certainly around food prices and how that then impacts on consumer sentiment, which I'll touch on in a few slides. So the inflation story, as I said, was very much driven by energy, and again we're seeing that is starting to fall. I read yesterday that wholesale energy prices on the island were around €105 per million megawatt hour, or whatever it was. So it was 105 in August. It was €388. So a significant downturn there, and that's very positive in terms of industrial costs and the costs of our businesses. So again, hopefully that's something that continues. And I think our view would be, well, we won't see the return to those very low energy costs that we had pre-spike, but we will see them trend down pretty significantly. That context, that inflation, those energy costs, all of that has pushed central banks. We could have a whole debate around whether they were right or not, but the fact is they've been on a path of interest rate increases and continue to be so. I suppose with the economic context heading as we think it is, the hope is that those interest rates actually are close to peak and will, over the next quarter or two, maybe start to plateau and then come down. Best estimates have been that as we see them start to converge at around 3%, just under 3% towards the end of 2025, furthest out in the forecast period we can see. So for those with, I suppose, fixed mortgages that are coming out of deals, or those on floating mortgages, the hope is that those interest rates start to come down. And obviously for a business, the price of debt, that's a significant issue and challenge for them currently. So if that starts to come down, that could help then with competitiveness on that front. So our view, and I suppose the consensus view, I would say as well, is that growth is predicted in Ireland. We're now thinking about that global context and how that moves through to relevance for Ireland and what it means. I've put up two different perspectives here. The previous view from the central bank. I don't do this to criticise forecasts. I do this really just to say how difficult it has been to project where the economy is going and to measure what's been happening. So the purple there is the 2022 version of the central bank's view of the economy, and you can see just how 2022 turned out much better. But the forward view is probably a little less optimistic than previously thought, but growth nonetheless. So we're expecting growth of just over 3% this year, and then continued growth in the next 2 years of just below 3%. Locally, the inflation and unemployment expectations are there on the screen. What I would say about the labour market in particular is that it has been a particular bright spot for the economy. We're now back in discussions about full employment. I think that's loaded with positives, but equally, for people trying to find staff and skill shortage issues, there's a challenge there in terms of engaging harder to reach people back into the labour market, and the constraining factor that could potentially have on economic capacity. So while the labour market has been a particularly positive, we're now into that space where we're thinking this is becoming challenging, and what does that mean? Does that constrain us in terms of where we go next? I always think, when I talk about my view of the economy and where it's likely to go next, I do lean heavily on consumer sentiment. I think when we measure the importance of the consumer to the economy, it's about 70% of economic activity reliant on consumerism. So I think it's important just to track where the consumer is. This is from the Credit Unions of Ireland, who have taken over the Consumer Sentiment Index from KBC Bank. We're delighted to see that source of data continue. It's really important to tracking the economy. And I suppose what it's showing is that we are seeing a recovery in confidence. It's slow and it's a sure upward tick. I wouldn't say it's particularly pacey, but it just shows that the various initiatives around energy supports that the government implemented And I suppose just the moving through all of that uncertainty, starting to see a little bit more surety from the consumer. The other line there, the blue line, is retail spending, and it's just to try and show that there is still a relationship between consumer sentiment and what that flows through to in terms of spending. So from the monitor then, we can see from the MasterCard data that the upper line there is the current monitor. I just put the lower line in there for some point of reference, which was the data from 2 years ago. Where we are currently is that we're seeing spending increase across the various elements of what's tracked. So whereas previously we were seeing discretionary spending had plummeted during the pandemic, and entertainment obviously had plummeted during the pandemic with lockdowns, etc. We're seeing pretty solid growth now across each of those cohorts. So the consumer is re-engaged, is spending again. Obviously there's an inflationary story in there as well when we think about the value of spending and the volume of spending, but we think there's plenty of money flowing through tills and flowing through online as well. Just then as well from the current monitor, business activity has soared back, I think was the phrase we've used here, and I think that's encouraging. I think businesses are maybe slightly ahead of consumers in terms of how they've baked in their thinking in terms of working through the forward view on where energy costs go, where other costs go, and so they're feeling a bit more optimistic. That's pretty much across the board. I would say it's particularly driven by sharp growth in services and construction, bit softer in manufacturing, but I'd say overall the business sector is looking particularly upbeat currently. And then as I was putting this deck together, and I think being a good consultant, you typically try and rely on things you've done previously and update them. So I was looking back at, I suppose this is our 12th monitor that we've been engaged with, and we've been really delighted to be so. And I just thought it would be useful, just in terms of our view of where the economy has been and where it's going. I took each of the headlines from each of the articles, the headline articles that we do in the front of the monitor. And it does sort of track a GT confidence indicator, if you like, in terms of where we think the economy is going. I'm not quite sure what we were thinking in September 21 with and off the charts, is the economy ready to roar? I think we were all just so frustrated with waiting for the economy to reopen, and then the next quarter came and it was like, surely it's about to go, and then we were sort of constrained with lockdowns again. And we finally got there and thought, let's have it, this economy's ready to take off. And just, I suppose, as we move forward through that, we see just how the inflation and the constraints that has brought to, I suppose, our thoughts on the economy. And then just the most recent addition now, we're now thinking that inflation's starting to loosen its grip, and that we're back into a more positive territory. But just that little caveat about labour market conditions. So I would draw your attention to this, and I'll finish here. I would draw your attention to this. I'll not go through each of those. I suppose just to highlight some of the key performance indicators, the various global PMI that we have, the public transport trips, spending pulses there too. So lots and lots of indicators in the monitor. The housing section as well, obviously telling the story there that we're all very familiar with. What I would just draw your attention to here is the new indicator that we have on FDI that was mentioned, and the ability now with the FT data to track that. So number one, FDI, small regions of the future 2023. Draw your attention to that. We have a video from FDI markets that I'll finish now, and I'll just move through to then show you that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and welcome. My name is Jonathan Wildsmith, and I'm part of a dynamic division within the Financial Times known as FDI Intelligence. At FDI Intelligence, we provide the world's most comprehensive offering of services related to foreign direct investment, with an unrivaled portfolio of news and analysis, data tools, events, and strategic guidance for the industry. And we're delighted to share today that we have provided data from FDI Markets, our cross-border Greenfield FDI Monitor, to Dublin Economic Monitor. Before the panel begins today, I would like to share with you some of our insights. Looking at the global picture, Greenfield FDI project numbers rose by 16% from 2021 to 2022, showing signs of ongoing recovery following the shock effects of the pandemic. FDI in Western Europe, the leading destination region for FDI worldwide, remains stable in 2022, seeing a rise of less than 1% amidst the conflict in Ukraine, soaring energy prices, rising inflation, and weak economic growth. The Dublin City region ranks amongst the top recipients of FDI in Europe, with many of the biggest multinational companies doing business here. Based on a study of our data, looking at 6 major European cities for FDI attraction since 2019, Dublin ranked ahead of the likes of Madrid, Amsterdam, and Lisbon, while Dublin ranked behind London and Paris by volume of FDI projects during this time. Ireland's capital city was the foremost destination for software and IT investment. It was also amongst the top recipients of FDI in the business services sector, and Dublin's strong performance is also reflected in its top ranking in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical sectors. To find out more about Dublin's value proposition and economic developments, you can follow Dublin Economic Monitor online via its website at dublineconomy.ie, and for more industry-leading news and data on FDI, please visit fdiintelligence.com. Thank you very much.
Andrew, thank you for the summary, and it's great to see new data sets being introduced. And over the years, we brought in data sets like MasterCard, and as the Lord Mayor mentioned, there's a whole new range of sets like restaurants, job postings, etc. So it really adds to kind of our understanding in terms of what's happening to the economy, and something that we're really passionate about in terms of bringing into future editions. And as Andrew said, dublineconomy.ie, you can kind of download some of the data and you can use it yourselves, as well as check out all the previous editions and headlines that you showed. I love that chart, Andrew, in terms of all the different headlines. We've gone to 33 of those over the last number of years. So just focusing on the topic of FDI, and I think that was a super video. Well done in kind of getting that together today. But it really gives his perspective in terms of how Dublin punches above its weight and is a star performer in terms of FDI. So I'm going to invite their panellists up to maybe talk a little bit more about it and to give some of their perspective. So if you want to come up and just grab a seat. So I'm just going to ask the panellists just to say a few words just about their background in terms of this area, and then we're going to go through, maybe Tony talk a little bit about the article in this edition of the Monitor, and then just have a discussion about maybe your perspectives in terms of Dublin. So Sinead, wonderful to be here today in Grant Thornton, beautiful venue, and you're the chairperson of Grant Thornton. So maybe do you want to talk a little bit about, your role in FDI and maybe just your background in this space? That would be great.
Yeah, thanks a million, Jamie. I'm the chair of the firm here, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here, and thank you very much for coming. I also have 2 other hats. I'm the current president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, so I'm seeing a lot of the FDI and the need to service that FDI from the accountancy profession side of the house. But then probably the most pertinent hat is in my day job, where I actually earn money for the firm, I'm a partner in the financial accounting and advisory services team. So that was a team that I founded with one of my other partners 10 years ago to solely service the multinationals. So we're a cross-disciplinary team, and we essentially service the multinationals as they are here in Ireland or come into Ireland. We're a one-stop shop for them for their global needs, from everything from audit to finance to compliance. So I certainly for the last 10 to 11 years have been dealing solely with multinationals.
Wow, so really interesting to hear about that later in the panel. So Tony, maybe maybe talk a little bit about, I know you do a lot of advisory in this space and have published a lot of books, so maybe just talk about your background.
Yeah, I once upon a time worked in the IDA many times years ago, and then retired to the academic life up in DCU. So I've been in DCU for almost 40 years kind of thing. I've been interested in the industrial development of Ireland from the 2 perspectives of indigenous industry and foreign direct investment. The article focuses on, I suppose, the basic issue is that we all know foreign direct investment is very important in the economy, but we probably don't realise the extent of the importance and the scale of it. So I would argue that foreign direct investment in Ireland is the difference between Ireland being this dynamic, modern, high-technology economy and basically being similar to Greece or Portugal. That foreign direct investment is primarily responsible for virtually all the fundamental strengths of the economy. Our export performance, primarily driven by foreign direct investment. High quality jobs, primarily driven by foreign direct investment. If you compare foreign direct investment with, say, Irish manufacturing, there's no comparison. The wage level's far higher in foreign direct investment companies than there are in local industry. So in every respect, foreign direct investment is a fundamental part of the economy. And despite having that connection with the IDA from many years ago, I would argue, as has been emphasised in the presentations, that we are superb at attracting foreign direct investment. Now, not entirely because of our own attributes. The fact that we speak English, which we should probably thank the English for getting rid of Irish, is a big attraction. The fact that we were such a basket case economy for many years and have a huge diaspora in, for example, the United States is an important contributing factor. Our time zone contributes and so on. We're a member of the European Union. But ourselves, we did fundamental things in terms of education, skills and so forth. And of course, again, partly responsible as individuals, we have a very rapidly growing population and a young population. So we have lots of very good things, not least tax from the financial side and grants and the marketing capability of the IDA. The big question, though, is do we sit back and relax and say we're fantastic and everything is grand? Economists are not allowed to be optimists, despite some of the slides being very optimistic. It's part of the training. We tend to look a little pessimistically at things. So if I look at the Irish economy, I would argue, and it's mentioned in the article, that we are excellent at the attraction of foreign direct investment. But first of all, the foreign direct investment has to be there to attract. So why is there foreign direct investment? Well, if we look at the waves in the past and the more recent one, we developed information technology worldwide, so we had things to produce. We had phones to produce, computers, mainframes, then micro machines, and so on. So we had all these new things to produce. They had to be produced somewhere, and luckily enough, most of it was produced by Americans, and they set up branches abroad. Then we had the whole development of social media, software, and so forth, and we got these products to produce and attracted in companies to produce them. Now, what's the next wave of things to be produced? And the next wave is probably artificial intelligence, but it's a less, at this stage, less universal impact than the kind of things we've gone through before. So if we don't have in the world economy lots of new things to produce, well then we don't need new companies, and they aren't there to start thinking of where they will locate. So we need the products to be produced first of all. Then we have to realize that we're going to be a product of our own success. It's one thing to go from dismal to good to better, but when you're already superb, what's the next adjective? You can't be more superb than superb. If you're excellent, can you be more excellent? And if you look at some of the things that the IDA would properly say about the Irish economy, in whatever modern sector you take, we've got 5 of the top 10, 8 of the top 10, 10 of the top 10. Well, then there's not an awful lot of the top 10 left to get. So that in the future, we're going to depend a lot more on our foreign direct investment by developments of existing companies that are here, as opposed to the attraction of new companies, because we've already got most of them, unless we then start moving down the layer towards much smaller type companies. So I would argue that the environment for foreign direct investment will be tougher than in the past. Lots of countries throughout Europe have developed their capability and skills, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and so on. So the gap between us and them is not as wide as it once was. There are possible concerns about the flow of foreign direct investment globally plateauing or maybe not growing so much. There are also concerns about the less, I suppose, emphasis on globalization as people worry about supply chains. They worry about depending on offshore suppliers and for example, the whole American approach of building up domestic capacity in particular technology sectors, as opposed to just letting worldwide supply chains operate. So there are lots of things to worry about. But more particularly, if we look at our own economy in terms of infrastructure, in terms of skills, in terms of even transport systems around the city, leave a lot to be desired. Now, our saving grace is that most cities have the same problems. It's not that every other city in the world has solved all its housing problems and its access problems and transport problems. They haven't. but it still remains a major issue. So I would argue that it's not enough to remain good at attracting foreign direct investment. We have to be excellent. And at the moment, I would argue, instead of moving from whatever we were in the past towards a far better situation, we are in a worrying situation in terms of the attraction of foreign direct investment in the longer term. Some of the issues have already been mentioned in the Dublin economy, skills problem and so on. But then there's the housing, the infrastructure and everything else. We worry about whether we have enough electricity capability. We worry about whether we have enough capability in ordinary social services such as health and so on. And all these things will matter. So I would argue we have a fairly tough task to retain the excellent performance that we've had. And unfortunately, excellent is what will be required. It's no good being good, because what we need is the continued attraction of foreign direct investment at the level where it performs this huge contribution to the economy. It's no good being good. We have to be excellent. Thank you.
Great, Tony. Thanks very much. And I think it leads nicely into Judith. I know you're with Utopia and very much focused on the idea of place brand. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yep, so my background is in FDI, 20 years in the public and private sector, where I worked for OCO Global, who's one of the leading advisors in FDI internationally. So they work with a lot of cities and in fact created the data set that we've seen earlier and that before it was sold to the FT. So a lot of experience around that FDI piece. But a couple of years ago, let us spin out from OCO around this place area. And the main rationale there was the fact that I could see that FDI was changing and that there was a bit of a more holistic view that was needed. In particular, I could see a lot of crossover between these different place pillars, if you like, particularly around education, where universities are becoming much more important, both in terms of the talent and the supply of talent, but also a lot of the high-end FDI that's been attracted, particularly into Ireland, is contingent on good R&D capability. So very important for companies and investors, very important for us in terms of bringing our talent across. And like any startup, also seen a market opportunity, I suppose. There's a big move towards localization and decentralization, less so in Ireland, where it's still very much led and managed by the IDA, but certainly across the UK, there's this big movement. And one of the things I would say about these place issues that Tony has referenced is the fact that it's more of a bottom-up initiative rather than top-down. So FDI typically is very command and control by governments and regions. But now we see the importance of livability and sorting out these factors, and that's driven from a bottom-up perspective. So a lot of aspects within local authorities' control. And I think the livability factor is very important for FDI going forward, because that is the aspect that attracts talent. And talent is mobile, and it's going to, it can go, now people, if they work in the tech sector, can live anywhere. They can live in Lisbon, they can go to Helsinki, wherever there's other strong tech sectors. And what does that livability mean? It's a wee bit nebulous. Livability means access. I like to think about it as Maslow and that very basic model, but it's about access to housing, access to services, making sure that you're living in a socially innovative society. So there's a lot of choice, and livability is increasingly important.
That's great. Thanks, Judith. And Sinead, I suppose you've been working with some of the biggest tech companies and financial services, etc., the last 10 years. How have you seen their perceptions change of Ireland, or what are the types of things they're looking for now compared to maybe what they were looking for 10 years ago?
I think they're still looking for the same things. I mean, I think 10 years ago the headline attractiveness was the tax, but once they came in, they then understood that it was the talent, it was the time zone, it was the English speaking, it was all that. They're still looking for that. And I mean, we've talked about the potential risk on skills shortage and the infrastructure, and the skills shortage should not be underestimated. There really is a big concern there. But that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the talent. They're looking for the ease to do business. And that would be one of the other things that I potentially would say that we need to be a little bit cautious of is our regulatory framework, and to make sure that we are, whilst being absolutely 100% robust in our regulatory framework, make it easy to do, and especially in maybe the financial services arena, make it easy for people to come in and set up. They are also looking for, it's the intangible things though as well. I mean, I primarily work with US companies, and the US just love Ireland. They just love Ireland. I mean, how many US people say they're Irish? I don't know the statistic now, but they love that, and that's something that we shouldn't forget. And then the final thing I'd say is that they, when they come, they stay for our work ethic and our work culture. And again, that's something that we shouldn't underestimate. We drive our work ethic and measure our work ethic by output. A lot of other countries do it by input and hours and numbers. We're output, and our output is strong and our output is high, and they don't forget that. So that's a reputation we need to work on. I feel a wee bit of a fraud sitting up here in the panel with the king of FDI sitting in the audience. So I mean, I don't know if it would be a good juncture to ask Martin's view of this. Martin Shanahan.
Martin, go. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Welcome to the partnership of GT.
Thanks very much, Sinead. This is day 5, folks. So I didn't quite expect to be speaking this morning. But listen, firstly, great to be here. Great to be at the launch of the Dublin Economic Monitor. I think a lot of very interesting points already made. I suppose, from my perspective, given the event that we're at, the first thing to say is that Dublin is a beacon for foreign direct investment, not just for Dublin, but nationally. Without Dublin, there isn't a proposition actually for foreign direct investment. So the national FDI effort depends on Dublin being attractive. I think that's important because it is a city of international scale, albeit that we have now done a much better job nationally of spreading FDI across the country. I listened to what the panel had to say, and I'm eternally optimistic, and it was kind of a requirement to be CEO of IDA, and I suppose I remain optimistic, notwithstanding some of the challenges that have been outlined, because in the pros column we have some really serious attributes that help us to win investment. The first and foremost of those is stability. Economic stability, political stability, geological stability, climatic stability. All of those things we kind of take for granted. You can't point to all countries having those attributes. The pro-enterprise policies and the ease of doing business that Sinead referred to is hugely important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And we need those pro-enterprise policies, obviously, to continue in order to attract investment. And that includes, obviously, our taxation policy, which has really been stable, both at the rate, albeit that we're now moving within the OECD framework, but also the regime and how it operates is hugely important. I think Tony mentioned an important point about the relativity piece, because relatively, actually, Ireland is very good for skills availability. That's a function of the output of our education system, which we've done a better job than most of aligning it with the needs of international business. And also the fact we've remained open and welcoming to attracting high-level skills and how the visa regime and work permit works. That's a real attribute. So there are lots of things in the plus column. There are challenges. Tony alluded to a few of them. They do revolve around the carrying capacity of the economy. The economy has grown so quickly that and recovered beyond, I think, all the expectations that many of us would have had in 2009, 2010, 2011. I was CEO of Furfos at the time, and we were looking at projections for the labour market. And I can tell you, if anybody had told us then that we would be at sub 4% now nationally in unemployment, nobody would have believed it, to be honest with you. So that recovery comes with challenges. We can see those in the housing market. While we have a steep upward curve for commencements and completions, it's not enough and it's not keeping pace. We have infrastructure issues, which were alluded to around energy, water, other infrastructure and so on. But Tony also pointed out they exist elsewhere as well. we need to execute and fix them quicker than elsewhere for them to be, for us to continue to remain attractive. I want to pick up on two things that Tony mentioned, because I agreed with practically everything that Tony said, but you can always be more superb, Tony. That pretty much is the job. We need to be better and better and better. The second thing is, there will always be new products and services. There is no question about, I think, that there will be new companies, new waves. And one of the things that we've done well, I think, in Ireland is we have worked with the existing base of companies, which I regard, the 1,700 multinational companies that are based here, I regard them as a kind of core national asset. And, we should continue to work with that asset, support them, and mine them for further investment. And about 70% of investments in any given year come from that base. But then you always need to replenish the base, and you always need to look at what's coming next. So Ireland typically never competed in heavy engineering, car manufacturing, automobiles. Yet we are now arguably building a very strong cluster around the technology that goes into automotives, and the whole car and all the value is now tied up in those. So you can do that. We went through small molecule research for pharmaceuticals. We then went into the biologicals, large molecules. We're now looking at the next wave of investments in those sectors, which will be around GMPs. So, always looking at the next thing. AI will create a whole new wave. It's been with us for a while. It's only, I think, entering the public consciousness because of things like GPT, but it will create a whole new wave of use cases that we probably haven't yet imagined. And I suppose then finally, just from my perspective, as very recently appointed Head of Industry and FDI in Grant Thornton, very much looking forward to working with Sinead and the team and building on the very good work that Sinead and colleagues have done as to how we continue to support that FDI base that's here and work with our colleagues in the international network, and particularly in the US, to continue to do that.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Martin. And I think I've read a book, Silicon Docs. There's some great stories about the personal connections of people in the IDA and how you manage to secure big investments like Google and others. It's a fascinating read, but I'm sure you've got lots of great stories we can hear at another time in terms of those personal connections. But the Irish link in America, I suppose the Biden effect, that's certainly going to be something that hopefully will be strong for us into the future. One of the areas that I think we're seeing a lot of just in the ecosystem in Dublin is you just have to look across the way. You've got Dogpatch, and you've got this unbelievably vibrant kind of tech ecosystem, a whole range of new startups. There's a whole load of tech unicorns and big, massive indigenous kind of companies being very successful. I don't think any of that would have been possible without maybe these big companies coming here and the skills and the expertise and the know-how. And some of the talk at the moment is, the whole tech sector, almost falling to pieces. But I don't really think that's the case here. We're not seeing a big dip in the employment figures in tech. I don't know, Sinead, what you're seeing in that, but I know we had a chat about this on our pre-call. But what are your thoughts in terms of the tech piece?
Well, we did, and I think we've got to look at it and keep it into perspective. Yes, it's awful, the job losses, but I think in Q1, even with the big job losses, there was a net increase of jobs in the tech sector. I like the term right-sizing, and I think it explains it really well. Those tech companies grew exponentially in the lockdown, just as our ways of working changed. So it's now being right-sized down to a more sustainable level, which I think will plateau now and then will begin to grow again. I think one of the benefits of it has actually been that it's released skills to some of maybe the smaller tech firms and as you say to some of the innovative and startups. So look, I'm going to learn to be positive like Martin and take the positivity out of that. But I do firmly believe
that's great. I'm just thinking about maybe some advice for Dublin moving into the future in terms of how we can position ourselves. Maybe Judith, you're kind of, this is your area. Any tips? I know you're working with the City Council. Any tips for the City Council in terms of how we can work to support the IDA and maybe position ourselves better into the future?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do locally, and I'm currently working with Dublin City Council and their stakeholder partners on the place branding campaign for Dublin. And place branding, it sounds very soft, and it's not just about here's a nice logo and we run out with a nice campaign and say good things about Dublin. It's much more strategic in terms of the activity. It's about managing the city reputation. It's about helping to promote the great stories of Dublin, of which FDI is one, and it's so well known internationally, and so many competitors across Europe are jealous of the performance of Dublin, and we're looked in at as best practice and leaders in this area. But we do also have to address some of the negative perceptions, some of which could be true, but others which are maybe not. So we hear a lot about housing, and we know it's a European issue. Lots of cities are competing for talent. So we want to really manage the city reputation, and we want to have vision and leadership there as well. So to the point where cities have a lot of common issues to address, that's not enough. I think we see that cities are emerging with very strong visions, be that around carbon neutrality, like Copenhagen, for example. So there might be social innovation, or they might be moving forward with very certain livability aspects, London and their digital inclusion, or Manchester aggressively pursuing integrated transport systems. So Dublin's doing all of those things, but it has to really land on that vision. It's so well known as an economic powerhouse in Europe, but I think that we have to really think about that and manage it collectively. And I would say that that's a real current trend as well. So we tend to think about regionalisation as moving, investment out of Dublin and into the other regions. But at MIPIM, for example, this year, I've seen lots of city regions coming together. So coming together under one brand, coming together under one narrative, everyone telling a similar story, using the power of all the assets that we have in Dublin, all the fantastic things. And that's not just the FDI story, that's a story about our literary heritage, our visitor offer, all the great things to do, our friendly people, those aspects. But we really need to have one version of the gospel and be taking that out together, particularly internationally.
That's great. Thanks, Judith. And Tony, any last perspectives?
I think we have to take a longer term perspective. I think our local development plan is too short-term perspective. We need, as you said, the vision. We need to see what do we think Dublin is going to be, what do we want Dublin to be in 50 years' time, and then the steps towards that. Because while I think Dublin is great, especially North Dublin, so I'm a bit nervous over here at the moment, but I had the visa till 9:30, but we might be running a little late. But Dublin is a beautiful city, but let's be realistic. We have an airport that can't park cars. We have public transport that can't carry enough people. We can't get houses for people. When we build houses, we build large office block type apartment blocks here with very little green space. We have a lot of work to do to, in the modern world, develop the city that we want to see. And of course, that's going to cost money, whether it's property taxes or commercial rates or whatever, and they're the kind of things we don't want to do. So I suppose it's a much longer term perspective on what we want to do, be clearer about what we want to do, and be realistic about what's necessary to get it done. And I think we're a bit far away from that at present.
That's great, Tony. Thanks for that. And Sinead, I'll leave the last word to yourself.
Ooh, there. Thanks for that. I think things are positive. I think I do have a concern, and again, it's on the regulatory side. We need to continue to make it easy to do business here. I think the ESG is a big issue in the ESG reporting, and CSRD that's coming down the track. We just need to be mindful of that and keep pace with the rest of the globe, and not, and not kind of work ahead and make our own regulations in Ireland and in Europe that are not in pace with America. That's one final niche, slight warning, if that's okay.
That's great. Listen, thanks very much. Mostly positive, some areas of concern, but thanks very much for the panelists, and also Martin for your input as well, which came as a bit of a surprise, but but thank you everyone, and I'd just like to thank the panelists. Thank you. Did you want to say something? No, you're great. Thanks. I'd just like to invite our Chief Executive, Owen Keegan, to come up and say a few words, but thank you, panelists. That's great. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks very much, Jamie. First of all, thank everybody for tugging out this morning to support our annual Dublin Economic Monitor Event. Word of thanks to the Lord Mayor. I think she's left us, but thank her for her opening remarks. It's a very busy time of the year for her. And a special word of thanks to Grant Thornton for their work in preparing the Monitor, managing the associated website, for hosting this event in this really attractive venue. So I want to thank our panellists, Sinead, Tony and Judith, and indeed Martin, for their contributions on FDI and its importance in the economic life of the city. FDI just seems to keep on delivering for Dublin and Ireland. I think we started publishing the Monitor back in February 2015, and we do it on a quarterly basis. And it's an initiative of the 4 Dublin local authorities. And I think we set 3 objectives. One, we wanted to have a kind of a go-to comprehensive source of up-to-date information and analysis on the Dublin economy. We wanted to develop and to encourage development of new data series on the Dublin economy. And we wanted to monitor city benchmarking data and to report on Dublin's comparative performance. Now, it's not really for me to judge how successful it has been, but certainly from a City Council perspective, we're very, very happy. We think this is a very worthwhile initiative and we're committed to keeping with it. This is my last few weeks as Chief Executive of the City, and I'll be exiting shortly. So I was asked just to make a few comments reflecting on the last, 7 years of the Monitor. So a few points that occurred to me. One, there's no doubt the Dublin economy has been extraordinarily resilient. And despite a number of major challenges, Brexit, the pandemic, we seem to be on a course of pretty sustained growth and extraordinary labour market performance. As was highlighted, I mean, FTA is undoubtedly the basis of our exceptional economic performance. The benchmarking data that we've been monitoring shows that Dublin consistently punches above its weight. And I have to say, and I meet chief executives of other capital cities quite frequently, there's a much greater appreciation of Dublin's performance abroad than there is at home. At the same time, and I think this comes across in the Monitor, there are very significant challenges for Dublin in maintaining its competitive position and issues like housing availability, talent availability, etc. And there must be concern that with continued domestic policy failures, it'll undermine the attractiveness of Dublin as a destination for FDI, particularly as and this has been mentioned, other economies are very keen to replicate our economic development model. And I suppose related to that, I think an over-reliance on FDI mightn't be the smartest option. And I personally, I must say, I've been concerned at the approach being taken, for example, by the government to tourism. And it's very clear that tourism is being kind of developed, albeit maybe for a very worthy cause. But I remember that tourism played a key role in leading the recovery of the Irish economy post the crash. And we're seeing now a massive reduction in capacity in that sector. So I suppose the final learning I'd have is that while rapid economic growth is on balance to be welcomed, in my experience, the problems associated with managing the consequences of rapid economic growth are almost as difficult to deal with as the problems of economic failure. Thank you very much.
That's great. I'd just like to thank Owen for all the support over the years. And Owen, I have a copy of the first Economic Monitor here. I kept it in the archives. And I'd just like to thank, I remember Owen started, you kind of said, well, I'd love to do something to put like a really kind of, comprehensive report or document together on Dublin's economy, something that's trusted, something that's a go-to for everyone, whether you're working in the embassies or whether you're working in economic development or you just general interest in the economy. And you said, let's make this happen. And I think it's a real testament to you over the years in terms of what we've pulled together, who we've partnered with, and Grant Thornton as well has been a super partner to do something that we can be really proud of. And also I love the approach in terms of let's find new data sets. Let's really push that agenda to kind of innovate on data, working with the likes of MasterCard and other companies to kind of push the dial on that. So I'd really like to thank you for your support, and I know the economic development team and Juliet, and we've been really, it's a real pleasure working with you over the years, and wish you all the best in your retirement. And hopefully you come back and come back for the next event next year, and and again and again, and hopefully this keeps on going to episode 66 or something like that. But I'd like to just acknowledge Owen's role, and thanks again for all your support. Thank you. So I'd just like to thank everyone for coming today. I'd like to thank Grant Thornton for being such a wonderful host, hosting us in this beautiful venue. I'd like to particularly thank Juliet at the back there and Jack and the Economic Development team for pulling this together. Also, Lorcan and Andrew, and just been fantastic working with you over the last couple of years. Packed house. Remember, go to dublineconomy.ie. We all love to see more traffic on the site. And thanks again for coming this morning, and I hope you have a nice day, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you.